He woke to the sound of her voice before he even opened his eyes. The darkness outside his window seemed alive, charged with the echo of a name so soft it might have been a figment of his dreams. His name. Samuel Hartley lay motionless in his silk sheets, heart hammering as the remnants of the dream faded, and he was left with only the wet warmth of his pillow and the heavy hush of the night. In the dream, she had appeared beneath an ancient oak, her fingers tracing scars on his palm, her eyes pleading for something he could barely understand. Then she spoke, and that voice, the voice of the woman he was days away from marrying, called to him in the darkest moments of his sleep. He glanced at the clock on his bedside table. 3:17 a.m. Too late to be productive, too early to be awake. Yet beneath the rustle of the curtains, he sensed movement, subtle, cautious. He rose, knees weak, and crept to the window overlooking the narrow courtyard of his family's ancestral mansion. There, bathed in the lantern's golden glow, stood Vivian Langley, his fiancée, impossibly pale in her white silk nightgown. Her hair cascaded in waves that caught the lantern light, and her eyes, wide and bright, searched the darkness. Her lips parted as if to speak again, but no sound came. In that heartbeat of silence, Samuel's mind raced. Had she come to him in desperation? Was this some elaborate ruse? The cold glass pressed against his forehead as he peered out, and he noticed a single paper rose pinned to the sill. Her favorite bloom, crafted from the pages of a love letter he had never sent. His breath caught. He remembered that letter, the one he'd tucked away in his desk drawer, convinced that revealing his past mistakes would undo the promise of a perfect future. A distant rumble of thunder broke the stillness, and Vivian's shoulders trembled. She raised her hand to her lips, and he knew she was shivering. Torn between propriety and concern, Samuel unlatched the window and swung it open. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and freshly turned earth. Before he could speak, she slipped inside, her eyes locked on his. "You heard me, didn't you?" she whispered, voice trembling between anger and relief. He nodded, words failing him. Vivian sank to the floor, clutching her knees, as tears welled in her eyes. Shadows danced across her face, revealing the aching vulnerability of a woman caught between love and fear. "I couldn't stay away," she murmured. "I had to know if you would answer me." Samuel's pulse thundered in his ears. Every instinct told him to comfort her, but a flicker of uncertainty held him back. Who was this woman in his bedroom at 3 a.m., speaking of unanswered questions and buried secrets? And why did her desperate plea feel more urgent than any vow they would exchange at the altar? As storm clouds gathered overhead, Samuel realized that the perfect engagement he'd meticulously planned was already unraveling. The dream, the midnight visit, the unsent letter, all pointed to a truth he'd been running from. And now, under the pale light of a lantern and the weight of her gaze, he understood that nothing would ever be the same again. In the tense silence that followed, one question hung between them like a thunderclap. Could love, built on half-truths and unspoken fears, survive the revelation that was waiting to shatter everything? Samuel Hartley stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city lights pulse like distant fireflies. He adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored charcoal suit and swallowed a breath that felt heavier than usual. As CEO of Hartley Technologies, he was accustomed to making swift decisions, but tonight uncertainty gnawed at him. He replayed every boardroom meeting, every investor call, every white-knuckled negotiation that had built his empire. But none of it mattered compared to the hollow ache in his chest. Behind his cool gray eyes lay a man who had learned, at 18, that vulnerability was a liability. That year, his fiancée of 3 years had vanished on the eve of their wedding, leaving him with unanswered questions and a reputation in tatters. He'd buried that pain beneath layered defenses, business ventures, stock prices, philanthropy, all carefully chosen to keep people at arm's length. Across town, in a cozy brownstone lined with climbing ivy, Vivian Langley paced her small kitchen, the steam from her herbal tea curling like tendrils around her wrists. A renowned sleep researcher at Lindenford University, she'd spent her career exploring the mysteries of the subconscious mind. By day, she lectured on REM cycles and hypnagogic hallucinations. By night, she recorded her own dreams in a leather-bound journal, hoping to decode their hidden messages. Vivienne's auburn hair spilled over her shoulders, and her hazel eyes, bright with curiosity, softened when she thought of Samuel. Their love story had patchwork beginnings, childhood friends reunited at a charity gala, two souls who rediscovered one another after years apart. But Vivienne carried her own scars. She'd lost her mother to early-onset Alzheimer's, an experience that taught her both the fragility of memory and the power of holding on too tight. In her living room, framed degrees and research awards lined the mantel, but the most prominent display was a photograph. Samuel and Vivienne, grinning beneath a spray of autumn leaves, arms wrapped around each other as though they could hold the world at bay. That moment, captured 2 months before their engagement, represented everything they believed love could be: carefree, courageous, unbreakable. Yet Vivienne's dreams had shifted after she agreed to marry Samuel. Once vivid fantasies of shared adventures had given way to fractured memories of loss, voices calling her name in the dark. Each morning she woke with a name on her lips, his name, and questions in her heart. Despite her calm exterior, Vivienne was restless. She spent long evenings in her apartment, pacing with one slipper half slid off, unable to settle until she'd logged every detail of her dreams. She kept a collection of childhood diaries stacked beside her bedside table, reminders that memory can change, but the heart remembers everything. That heart, fragile and fierce, was drawn to Samuel's fortress of success, yet wary of the walls he'd erected. She believed in emotional honesty, in naming feelings even when they frightened her. But she hadn't told Samuel about the dreams, fearful he would dismiss them as superstition or, worse, evidence of her instability. Meanwhile, Samuel's inner circle watched the engagement with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. His best friend and COO, Marcus Reyes, tapped his pen on the mahogany boardroom table as he reviewed the proposal summary again for the 5th time. "You're making the right move, Sam," Marcus said, voice low and steady. "Vive's brilliant, she brings balance, but don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment." Marcus was the only man Samuel trusted completely, yet even he sensed the cracks beneath Hartley Technology's gleaming surface. When Samuel leaned back, eyes narrowing on the cityscape, he thought of Marcus's caution and thanked him without sharing his own fear. That tonight's dream and Vivienne's silent heartache could shatter everything. In contrast, Vivienne's closest confidant, her roommate and lab assistant, Priya Mehta, flitted about arranging fresh flowers in a vase. Priya's warm laughter echoed off the walls, a bright melody in Vivienne's otherwise restless nights. "You need to tell him, Vi," Priya urged, tucking a sunflower into the arrangement. "You can't get married carrying a secret this big. He may surprise you." Priya, whose family had emigrated from Mumbai, understood sacrifice and didn't believe in hiding pain behind forced smiles. Yet she, like Vivienne, was uncertain how Samuel would respond to talk of dreams that felt more like warnings than fantasies. On the morning of their engagement photo shoot, Samuel drove his sleek black sedan through dawn's purple haze, rehearsing the words he would say. Vows that spoke of loyalty, devotion, a promise to stand by her in dreams and in daylight. He'd chosen the old botanical gardens for its sunlit paths and arching oaks, intending to capture the enduring strength of their love. But when he arrived and saw Vivienne standing beneath the ancient trunk, her auburn hair catching the morning rays as if set aflame, he felt a cold drop of doubt. She smiled, radiant in a cream-colored dress that swirled around her ankles, but her eyes held a question he'd never learned to read. Vivienne, clutching her bouquet of white roses, stepped toward him, each footfall gentle on the dew-damp lawn. She thought of her mother's final days, how her mind had slipped away in a haze of unspoken grief, and how vital it was to speak truth before it vanished. "Sam," she began softly, voice quavering with vulnerability, "I need to tell you something." He paused, chest tightening against a tide of fear. Here, in the tranquil hush of morning, preparation and control offered no armor. The wind stirred leaves around their feet, a whispered reminder that even the strongest branches yield to the slightest breeze. This was the moment their worlds collided. His realm of business precision and emotional reservation, her domain of scientific inquiry and heartfelt honesty. two people in love, each carrying invisible burdens. His fear of betrayal, her fear of silence. Together, they would be tested by the storm growing beyond these gardens, an emotional tempest that promised to reveal every hidden wound, every buried truth. And as their eyes met beneath the arching boughs, both sensed that their carefully constructed futures would shift forever, guided by voices spoken in sleep and secrets waiting to be named. That evening, Samuel returned home later than usual. A board meeting had gone long, investors pressing for faster expansion, analysts questioning every metric. He climbed the broad, carpeted staircase of the Hartley estate with the weight of those demands pressing on his shoulders. As he reached the landing, he noticed something out of place. The soft glow of lamplight emanating from the library, a room he always secured before leaving. His pulse quickened. He pushed open the heavy oak door to find Vivian seated at the antique writing desk, head bowed over scattered papers. By the flickering lamplight, he saw her hand trembling as she traced lines of spidery handwriting that he recognized all too well. His unsent letter, the one he'd believed lost. His breath stuttered, heart pounding like a trapped bird. "Vivian!" His voice cracked. She looked up, eyes glossy, cheeks damp. "Sam, I found this in the mailbox," she whispered, sliding the letter toward him. The envelope bore no stamp, only his crisp, familiar handwriting. "For when you're ready to know the truth." Samuel closed the distance between them in 3 strides, snatched the letter, and tore it open. Vive's soft gasp echoed behind him. The contents spilled out. Every word he had drafted the night his first fiancée disappeared, words he wrote in anguish, confessing a reckless business decision that had cost lives and left him racked with guilt. He had sealed it away, convinced he could never show it to anyone, yet here it lay in his fiancée's trembling hands. Vivian reached out. "I thought you should know. I've had dreams, nightmares ever since we got engaged. Voices calling your name, warnings I couldn't ignore. And then this appeared. I needed answers." His head spun. This letter was his own confession of guilt and shame, a past he thought long buried. More than that, it contained explanations for behaviors he never wanted her, or anyone, to understand. He stuffed the pages back into the envelope, voice low and controlled. "Vive, you shouldn't have opened that." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I had to, because I felt you pulling away, because I loved you, Sam, but I can't marry a man who hides his past and hides the truth." He closed the distance and gently took her hand, but she jerked it away. "I'm sorry," he said softly, but the apology tasted hollow. Vivian rose, wrapping her arms around herself. "No, you're not. You're sorry I found out this way." Her voice cracked raw. "I don't know who you really are." A sudden crash of thunder rattled the windows. Outside, rain began to pelt the panes in jagged sheets, as though the heavens themselves answered her cry. Samuel stared at Vivian's retreating figure, fury and fear warring in his chest. He reached for her, but she flung herself past him into the swirling storm, cloak trailing. Before he could react, she had slipped through the library's French doors onto the balcony. He raced after her, the rain soaking his suit in seconds. Vivian stood at the railing, shoulders hunched, soaked through. Her eyes were fierce beneath dark lashes. "If you loved me," she shouted over the wind, "you would have trusted me with the part of yourself you hide." He braced himself against the railing. "I protect you from my mistakes," he shouted back. "I wanted to spare you pain." Her laugh was bitter. "Pain can't hurt me more than lies. I don't care about your reputation, Sam. I care about you." A lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating her face in stark relief. Betrayal etched in each line. Samuel's world contracted. He remembered every sleepless night he'd returned to an empty bed, every whispered promise he'd buried beneath ambition. He realized those patterns had begun again, walls closing around his heart, even as he stood before the woman he loved most. He took a tentative step forward. "Vivian, please!" She turned, tears streaming, hair plastered to her forehead. "I need time," she said, voice barely audible above the storm. "I can't do this right now." Then, without another word, she stepped off the balcony, slipping. Samuel's scream tore from his throat as he lunged forward, hands outstretched. Time slowed as her body arched backward, arms flailing. He caught her wrist for an instant, the flimsy fabric of her dress slipping through his fingers, and then she was gone, falling into the dark courtyard below. For a heartbeat, Samuel froze. Then he scrambled over the railing, heart pounding in his throat, and dropped to the soaked stone beneath him. Vivian lay limp, rain pooling around her. He knelt, cradling her against his chest, every rational thought obliterated by sheer panic. Her eyelids fluttered. "Sam!" she whispered, voice weak but alive. He brushed water from her face, relief and terror blurring his vision. When the paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, a blurred flurry of uniforms and lights, Vivian was conscious but shaken, her arm in a sling, bruises blossoming on her skin. Samuel hovered at the hospital's emergency entrance, hand clamped over his mouth, watching as she was wheeled inside. He realized then that nothing could undo the moment he'd driven her to that balcony in the first place. Inside the sterile hallway, he finally let himself break. He pressed his forehead to the wall, hearing his own ragged breaths. The letter burned in his coat pocket, a testament to the past he could no longer hide. And beneath that, a deeper truth. He had thrown Vivian's trust away and nearly lost her forever. By the time Vivian emerged hours later, pale but determined, Samuel was waiting. He took her hand gently, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he choked. "I should have told you everything." Vivian met his gaze, green eyes steady despite exhaustion. "Tell me now," she said softly, "or let me go." In that moment, the storm outside gave way to a fragile dawn. The inciting incident that shattered their comfortable illusions had arrived, not through business rivalries or external enemies, but through the unguarded vulnerabilities of two hearts forced into the open. And as they stood together beneath the rising sun, Samuel knew their journey had truly begun. The first weeks after the balcony incident felt like walking through molasses for Samuel and Vivian. Each sunrise brought its own ache, his guilt, her lingering fear, and neither knew how to bridge the widening gulf between them. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, sparks of hope flickered whenever their eyes met. Back at Lindenford University, Vivian buried herself in sleep study research, convinced that understanding her subconscious turmoil would help her confront the past. Samuel, in turn, insisted on accompanying her one evening to her lab, offering moral support even as his own world teetered under the strain of the scandal. He felt out of place among EEG machines and blinking monitors, the hum of electronics a foreign language. Vivian guided him through her process, electrodes placed gently on his temples, data streams captured on a glowing screen that mapped his brain activity during sleep cycles. She explained each spike and lull in careful tones, her fingers brushing his shoulder whenever she needed a point of emphasis. Their proximity reignited something warm in Samuel's chest, memories of laughter in sunlit courtyards and cozy evenings at home. But shadows of doubt lingered. Late that night, as he left her lab, she hesitated and touched his jacket sleeve. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, eyes bright. "For being here, for trusting me." He nodded, voice husky. "I want to understand you, Vive." Their closeness felt complicated, as though every tender gesture risked reopening old wounds. Meanwhile, unresolved questions from Samuel's history began to resurface. Marcus, ever the loyal friend, probed gently during board meetings. "You okay, Sam? You seem distracted." Samuel nodded through the meeting, but later, in the privacy of his study, he pored over newspaper clippings from a decade ago, articles detailing the explosion at one of his factories, the lawsuits, the class action suits. He read and reread the quotes from grieving families, each line stoking his lingering shame. Vivian sensed his unrest when they met for dinner at La Petite Chaumière. Over steaming bowls of consommé, she reached out. "You can tell me anything," she whispered. But Samuel only stared at his spoon, unable to unearth the courage. Instead, he changed the subject, asking about her research breakthroughs, and forced a smile that did little to calm her own anxieties. That night, Vivian's journal teemed with questions. Why can't he share his pain? What secret still scares him? She realized love alone wouldn't suffice. She needed trust, and she didn't know how to forge it without exposing them both to more hurt. Unbeknownst to them, someone from Samuel's past had been watching. Helena Stone, a sharp-tongued investigative journalist whose exposé on Hartley Technologies had once led to a recall, surfaced with renewed interest. She cornered Samuel at a gala fundraiser, her pen poised. "Mr. Hartley," she purred, "care to comment on rumors that you've asked a woman, your fiancée, to sign a prenup waiving any claim to your company's liabilities?" Samuel's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, Vivian stepped forward. "We're not discussing personal matters in public," she said firmly, her protective stance surprising him. Helena smirked, eyes glittering. "Funny, your papers suggest she has every right." Cameras flashed, and the couple bristled under the glare. Backstage in a silent corridor, Vivian confronted Samuel in a low voice. "Is it true, the prenup?" His face went pale. I wanted to protect you." She stared at him, hurt blooming in her chest. "Protect me from what? From knowing the truth about you?" The tension between them crackled like static. That weekend, Samuel arranged a private retreat at Moonfall Lake, his family's secluded cabin on the misty shores. He hoped that isolation, away from prying eyes, might coax Vivian into opening up. She arrived at dusk, the lake's surface smooth as glass, and found him waiting with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. They sat together on the porch steps, shoulders almost touching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Samuel exhaled, as though shedding a lifetime of tension. "I made a mistake with the prenup," he admitted, voice low. "I thought if anything went wrong, you'd be safe." Vivian looked at him, eyes softening. "Safe from the consequences of your past," he nodded, swallowing hard. "I wasn't ready to face what I'd done. I thought I could build a future by hiding those skeletons." He turned to gaze at the lake, haunted. "But I realize now that hiding our history won't keep us safe. It will only drown us." Vivian placed her hand on his. "We all have ghosts, Sam, but love isn't about protection. It's about facing them together." The hush settled between them like a shared promise. Buoyed by the cabin's quiet magic, they spent the next day exploring the forest trails, laughing as they nearly missed a hidden waterfall. Yet when night fell and they returned to the cabin's dimly lit parlor, Samuel found himself hesitating before lighting the hearth. The dancing flames reminded him too much of the fire that had consumed his first fiancée's home, a fire he'd regretted for years, though his hands had stayed clean. Vivian watched as he froze, gaze fixed on the hearth. "Tell me," she said gently, stepping closer. "Tell me about her." His breath caught, eyes brimming. "Her name was Amelia," he confessed. "She died in that fire, Vive. I never told you because I blamed myself, and I was afraid you'd see me as the same man who lost everything." Tears glistened in Vivian's eyes. She cupped his face. "I see you now, Sam. Not the ghost of your past, but the man here with me." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as the cabin's warmth finally felt like home. As they returned to the city, hand in hand, the world outside remained unforgiving. Helena Stone's article dropped that morning. An exposé on Samuel's gravesite visit after the factory accident, paired with insinuations about undisclosed settlement funds. Vivian watched as Samuel's phone buzzed with alerts, texts from lawyers, investors, news headlines. In the silence of their shared car ride, she realized he was reliving the same isolation he'd experienced years ago. "Come back to me," she said, voice breaking. "I need to know you're here." He reached for her hand, gripping it tight. "I'm here," he promised, but the tremor in his voice mirrored her own fear. Refusing to let their bond break under external pressure, Samuel and Vivian devised a plan to address the exposé head-on. He arranged a press conference to acknowledge past mistakes, apologize publicly, and commit to transparency going forward. Vivian stood beside him, her hand on his arm, a steadfast presence. When cameras rolled and reporters shouted questions, Samuel spoke from his heart. "I cannot undo the past, but I can choose honesty from this moment on. To my fiancé, Vivian, thank you for teaching me that truth isn't weakness. It's the cornerstone of trust." Vivian's eyes filled with pride as Samuel's words landed with sober conviction. Afterward, in the quiet of their shared penthouse suite, Vivian pressed her lips to Samuel's cheek. "We did it," she whispered, relief softening her features. He turned to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Together," he echoed. Yet even as they rebuilt trust, old habits surfaced. During a late-night meeting with potential investors, Samuel excused himself to take an urgent call. Fear clawed at Vivian as she watched him step out into the hallway. Minutes stretched into 10, then 20 before he returned, eyes hollow. "What happened?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. He shook his head. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Vivian knew the look of deflection too well. Later that evening, she confronted him. "You promised no more secrets." Samuel, weary and defensive, snapped back. "Some things aren't yours to carry." Hurt and anger flared in Vivian's eyes. "Then what is mine to carry, Sam? If not your fears?" The argument ruptured any progress they'd made, leaving them each to retreat behind their own walls. That night, Vivian wrote in her dream journal, "Trust is a fragile bloom, easily crushed." The next day, as Samuel prepared for a global conference call, he received word that a rival company was about to launch a hostile takeover attempt, using the recent scandal to drive down Hartley's stock value. The boardroom's tension reached a crescendo as heated discussions erupted. Samuel excused himself abruptly, the weight of responsibility pressing in. Vivian, waiting in the suite for their morning call, saw the strain etched on his face when he finally returned. She reached out, but he pulled away. "Don't," he murmured, eyes bleak. "I can't talk about work right now." She nodded, chest tightening. Left alone, she remembered her own promise to face everything together. She grabbed her coat and followed him back to the office. Standing outside the conference room door, she felt the walls closing in. Summoning courage, she knocked. Inside, startled board members paused, then fell silent as Samuel opened the door. Vivian stepped forward. "Sam, let me in," she said quietly. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the expectant faces of investors and colleagues. Finally, he nodded. She slipped inside and took his hand. Clearing his throat, Samuel addressed the room. "I apologize for the unprofessional interruption. This is my fiancée, Dr. Vivian Langley." The room murmured. Vivian lifted her chin. "I came because I believe in transparency, not just in technology or research, but in relationships. We face challenges together, and I stand with Sam." Her words rang with conviction, and the room's energy shifted. Investors exchanged nods. Marcus later told Samuel, "You did good bringing her in." Samuel squeezed Vivian's hand. "It was because of her I found my voice." That evening, back at the penthouse, they shared a quiet dinner. No walls, no deflections, just two people revealing their fears and hopes. Samuel described the takeover threat, the pressure to perform, and his fear of losing everything. Vivian spoke of her dreams, still tinged with warnings, and her longing for true partnership. They created a ritual. Each night before bed, they would share one fear and one hope. It became their lifeline, weaving threads of honesty into the fabric of their relationship. Over time, Samuel's nightmares receded, replaced by dreams of sunlight filtering through oak leaves. Vivian, in turn, found peace in the rhythm of his presence beside her. Even as they deepened their trust, Sebastian Grant, Samuel's former mentor turned rival, launched a smear campaign, planting false stories that Samuel had manipulated safety reports. Social media erupted with comments questioning Hartley's ethics. Samuel faced angry callers, a threatened class action suit, and plummeting stock. Vivian refused to let him face it alone. She drafted a joint op-ed on business ethics and mental health, backing him publicly. When the piece published, Hartley and Langley, Truth and Trust, it sparked support from industry leaders and mental health advocates. Though the storm wasn't over, it began to subside. Through every challenge, whether professional attacks or personal insecurities, Samuel and Vivian learned that love isn't the absence of conflict, but the willingness to fight it together. Their bond, tempered by adversity, grew stronger than either could have imagined. And as autumn's bronze leaves danced around the Hartley estate once more, they stood united, two hearts no longer afraid to share their secrets, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The night of Hartley Technologies' annual gala arrived like a final gauntlet. The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, and the city's elite gathered beneath vaulted ceilings draped in silk. Every flash of the paparazzi's cameras felt like a hammer striking Samuel's already fractured confidence. He stood at the head of the dais, delivering his keynote address on innovation and integrity, while Vivian watched from the side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Midway through his speech, Samuel froze. The words on the teleprompter blurred as memories flooded in, the image of Amelia's scorched home, the anguished cries of victims, his own silent tears in an empty chapel. The audience, investors, reporters, dignitaries waited. A tremor in his voice threatened to shatter the room. He swallowed, fighting to steady himself, but then Helena Stone's steely gaze cut through the crowd. She stood at the back, microphone in hand, her voice amplified by the ballroom's speakers. "Mr. Hartley, care to address the allegations that you knowingly compromised safety protocols to boost profits?" A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Cameras swung toward Helena, journalists whispered. Samuel's heart thundered. All eyes locked on him. The polished veneer of the evening cracked wide open. Vivian sensed Samuel's rise and fall of breath. She pressed her hand against his back, grounding him as tears welled in her eyes. In a single moment, everything they had built, trust, openness, shared purpose, hinged on his response. He looked down at her, finding strength in her unwavering presence. Clearing his throat, he turned to the microphone. "It's true," he began, voice steady but low. Silence fell like a blanket. "Years ago, during a particularly challenging quarter, I made a decision that put profit before people. I delayed certain safety upgrades to meet our targets." A murmur swept through the crowd. Samuel raised a hand for quiet. "I believed then that I could contain the risk. I was wrong." Vivian watched his confession radiate sincerity, the sorrow in his gray eyes more revealing than any prepared statement. "Because of that decision," he continued, "an accident occurred at one of our facilities. Lives were lost. Families shattered. I have carried that guilt every day since." The chandeliers seemed to dim as he spoke his truth. He paused, acknowledging the weight of his words. "I've spent sleepless nights trying to atone, but I cannot change what happened. What I can do, what I will do, is ensure it never happens again." Samuel stepped from behind the podium, moving closer to the edge of the dais. "I promise full transparency. I promise to work with regulators, to support the families affected, and to lead this company with integrity above all else." Helena Stone stood rooted to the spot, her challenge met with raw honesty. Journalists scribbled furiously. Investors exchanged uncertain glances, but many nodded in appreciation of his candor. Samuel's chest tightened, and then he felt Vivian's hand slip into his. He turned to her, eyes shining. Before he could say more, Helena's voice cut in one last time. "And what of your personal promises to Dr. Langley?" The room stilled once more. All attention shifted to Vivian. She stood, heart pounding, and stepped onto the dais beside Samuel. The crowd's hush felt engulfing, but she drew a deep breath. "I know his past," she said calmly, voice clear enough to carry to every corner of the hall. "I've seen the man haunted by regret, but I've also seen the man who dedicates his life to making things right." She placed her free hand over Samuel's heart. "I believe in him, and I choose him, not because he's perfect, but because he's brave enough to face his imperfections." A ripple of applause began, tentative at first, then swelling into genuine approval. Samuel's throat tightened with relief and pride. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Vivian's face. "Thank you," he whispered. Suddenly, an urgent buzz on Samuel's lapel pulled him back. A whispered message from Marcus that a secondary boardroom had voted to stall the takeover bid, but only if Samuel could secure one last critical shareholder vote. The mood shifted as whispers of corporate maneuvering resumed. Yet the personal battle had been won. Samuel looked out at the crowd, finding allies in unexpected faces. In that charged atmosphere, Samuel raised his voice one final time. "Tonight, I've revealed my greatest failure and found my greatest strength in the woman next to me. I ask for your trust going forward, and I promise to earn it every single day." The standing ovation that followed echoed off vaulted ceilings, resonating in Samuel's chest like a healing drum. He turned back to Vivian, tears glistening wetly in both their eyes, and for a moment the gala vanished. All that mattered was the woman who had stood by him, challenging him to be more than his mistakes. Backstage, as the crowd's applause faded, Samuel and Vivian embraced amid the swirl of lights and tuxedos. Marcus found them, clapping Samuel on the back while offering Vivian a respectful nod. Yet beneath the celebration, they both knew the journey was far from over. External foes would continue to test their resolve, and internal doubts would still gnaw at them on dark nights. But they had crossed the crucible together. Later, in their private suite high above the city, Samuel paced beside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline glittered with promise and peril alike. Vivian sat on the chaise longue, her engagement ring glinting in the lamplight. He paused, looking down at the woman who had risked everything for truth. "I was terrified," he admitted, voice raw. "Terrified you'd leave me tonight." Vivian rose, stepping into his arms. "I was terrified too," she confessed, "that I might lose you if I asked for the honesty we both deserved." She tilted his chin, meeting his eyes. "But I see now that honesty isn't the end. It's the beginning." Their kiss was fierce and tender, as if sealing a vow deeper than any scripted promise. In that embrace, every betrayal laid bare, and every fear confronted wove together into something resilient and new. Samuel lingered in her arms, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. The crescendo of the night's triumph mingled with the steady pulse of their shared truth. In the eye of this emotional storm, they had found clarity. Love, when paired with unflinching honesty, could weather any tempest. As dawn approached, the pair stood at the window, watching early traffic trickle along the streets below. Vivian slipped her hand into Samuel's. "The next chapter begins now," she said softly. He nodded, pressing her hand to his lips. "Together," he echoed, and in the quiet promise of their clasped hands, they both knew that the climax of their story, this moment of reckoning, had irrevocably changed them. No longer were they two isolated souls haunted by past demons. They were a united front, ready to face whatever the future would bring. Vivian sat curled up in the armchair beside the cold fireplace, her silk nightgown damp from the mist outside. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked slowly, counting each heavy second. Samuel paced before her, one hand running through his hair, the other holding the unsent letter she'd somehow found, the one with words he had never intended anyone to read. "I shouldn't have come," she said finally, her voice a brittle whisper. Samuel stopped pacing. "But you did." She looked up at him, her eyes hollow. "Because I needed to know what you were hiding." He stiffened. "I'm not hiding anything." Vivian stood. Her fingers trembled as she pointed to the letter. "Then why this? Why write about a woman named Eliza? Why write as if you'd lost her forever?" Samuel couldn't answer. He walked to the fireplace and stared into the empty hearth. "It was a mistake, a long time ago." Vivian stepped closer, her voice low. "Then why is her locket still upstairs?" He turned sharply. "What?" She didn't flinch. "I found it in the attic, hidden in a box with letters dated only a year ago. Not 10, not 5, 1. Samuel's mouth opened, then closed. He looked suddenly younger, as if the truth stripped years from his confident exterior. "I told you the attic was off limits," he began. Vivian interrupted. "You said it was filled with dust and broken things, but I found a shrine, Samuel. Photographs, letters, a lock of hair wrapped in blue ribbon. I found love poems in your handwriting, not written to me." The weight of her words settled heavily between them. "I should go," she whispered again. "No," he said firmly, stepping forward. "Please, let me explain." Vivian hesitated. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock. Samuel took a breath. "Her name was Eliza. We were engaged before you. She died in this house." Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. "Died," he nodded. "Fell from the staircase. It was ruled an accident, but I've never believed that." The walls seemed to tighten around them. "And the letters?" she asked. "I kept writing to her, even after. I know how it sounds, but I wasn't ready to let go." Vivian backed away, tears brimming in her eyes. "Then why me, Samuel?" His voice cracked. "Because you made me feel alive again." She turned, walking toward the door. Her hand paused on the knob. "Vivian," he said, barely audible, "please don't leave tonight." She stood still. "I don't know if I believe in fate," he said, "but maybe you were meant to find that letter." She slowly turned to face him. "Then maybe I was." But the look in her eyes wasn't one of forgiveness, it was of dread. Because the attic wasn't just a room of forgotten memories, it was where she'd seen something move. And that something had whispered her name. Later that night, the storm rolled in thick and merciless. Thunder cracked above the hills. Samuel had retired to the study, and Vivian, compelled by something unshakable, crept back up the attic stairs with nothing but a candle. The door creaked open again, revealing the same box. The photographs. The dried flower pressed into an old journal. Her fingers brushed a dusty frame. Eliza's face stared back. Younger than Vivian, but hauntingly familiar. As she turned to leave, the candle flickered wildly. The air shifted. Then a whisper. Soft. Drawn out. "Vivian!" She spun around. "Who's there?" No answer. But then movement. Just behind the hanging sheet that covered an old mirror, Vivian's breath caught. She stepped forward, trembling, and pulled it away. Her reflection blinked. But she hadn't. Vivian stumbled down the stairs, ghost pale. Samuel found her near the cellar door, her lips murmuring Eliza's name. "I saw her," she whispered. "She's still here." He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I know." Silence. "You knew," she hissed. "You've seen her." "I hear her every night," Samuel admitted. "Sometimes she cries, sometimes she hums. I thought I was losing my mind." Vivian clutched his arm. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because she only appears to women." Vivian returned to the attic by day. She rifled through the box again, searching more desperately now. Beneath the velvet lining of the chest, she found a hidden compartment inside, a diary. Eliza's. The last entry stopped her heart. "He loves me, but someone wants me gone. I saw her in the garden again today, watching me. I don't know her name, but she carries a knife tucked in her apron." Vivian froze. There had been no other woman in Samuel's life, had there? Vivian confronted the old housekeeper, Mrs. Dalloway. "You were here when Eliza died," she said. Mrs. Dalloway trembled. "I did what I was told." Vivian's voice was ice. "By who?" A pause, then a whisper. "His mother." Samuel's mother had died years ago, but she had hated Eliza, believing she wasn't worthy of the family name. "She didn't push her," Mrs. Dalloway said, "but she scared her. Said she'd ruin Samuel, that she wasn't good enough. Eliza ran, tripped on the staircase, and died. That night, Vivian returned to the attic one last time. She placed Eliza's locket around the mirror. "I know now," she whispered. "You weren't crazy, you were hunted." In the reflection, Eliza's ghost appeared, smiling faintly. Tearful, the attic grew warmer. The mirror cracked, but instead of breaking, light poured from it, and Eliza vanished. Months passed. Vivian and Samuel renovated the attic, turning it into a library. The house felt lighter, warmer. One evening, Vivian hung a new portrait in the hallway, her and Samuel, arms wrapped around each other. And just beside it, a tiny, old photograph of Eliza. So she'd never be forgotten. In the last scene, Vivian finds a letter on her nightstand, one she never wrote. In delicate handwriting, "Thank you for giving me peace. I was never angry, just waiting to be heard." Eliza Vivian smiled through tears. Some love stories don't end in marriage. Some end in silence, but all deserve to be told.